So this is a crazy story. The night before, Lefty Kreh he was writing for the Baltimore Sun at the time, and he wanted a little night fishing or a night fishing story. And so he got a hold of me and said, do you think you could get a good fish for me? And I said, maybe I could if I could get lucky. And so that night we were down on Spruce Creek, and I took about a 6-pound brown trout, and it was a heavyweight. It was about.
That was Joe Humphries telling the story about the largest fly-caught brown in the state of Pennsylvania. Another milestone for you today. This is episode number 73 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Please take a look at the Wet Fly Swing Member Society group, where you can support some of the new innovative partner companies we have and get exclusive discounts on products and services. Head over to wetflyswing.com/members to get started today. In today's episode, I chat with 90-year-old Joe Humphries, who is quite possibly the biggest name in fly fishing today. We talk about the new movie that was produced to document his life. We hear about how his wrestling background influenced him and how the Great Depression also had a big impact. Joe shares some of the tips on casting in the wind, how to set up your leader, and how long he plans to stay in the game. Don't miss this as Joe and I poke Joe a bit about his background on how he slaps around people to get them fired up. So, without further ado, here's Joe Humphries from Live the Stream.
How's it going, Joe?
Very good, David.
Good. It's really good to have you on here. I've interviewed a number of people that have had some connections to you. Obviously, you've been around a long time, so it's no surprise. George Daniel was on in a previous episode. I think he was the one where he helped me connect with you. But yeah, you've got a movie coming out this year, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah.
Could you talk about?
Yeah, we with the film festival, the movie has been it's on the stream. It's been very successful. Won several awards. The Breckenridge Film Festival, the Indianapolis Heartland Festival, Reading, Pennsylvania Festival, Westchester, that's out of Philadelphia. That's been very successful. So it's moving right along, and it will be in Obispo in California.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
it's been a lot of fun and rather exciting, and we won several awards, and so it's been fun. Yeah.
I'll link out in the show notes for this episode. I'll leave links to where they can check out where you're heading and where you've been. But maybe you can, before we jump into some of your background and the movie and stuff, you can just talk about how you first got into fly fishing.
Well, I was raised in a little village of Curvensville, Pennsylvania, and in the Depression of 1929. My father lost his job in the bank because the bank's closed, and so we moved to State College, Pennsylvania, and I was 6 years old at the time. So State College, Pennsylvania was at that time rather infamous in the fly fishing world because Spring Creek had a section on it, 1 mile section, which was the first fly fishing project, I think, in the United States, if not the world. And so it was 1 mile of stream. It opened on May the 15th and closed July 31st. And on one day, in the opening day, and I can't remember what year it was, but there were 3,000 fishermen in that 1 mile. Now, this is fly fishing, and these guys came from all over the world. So this project started in 1934. So Pennsylvania was really way ahead of its time relative to a major project like this in the fly fishing world. So the fact that it was such a big thing and fly fishing was an exciting thing to do. But first, my father took me fishing when I was 6, when we first came to State College. And he bought me a Kingfisher rod. It was, I think, 7.5 foot, and it cost $7, I think, something like that. And we went to Spring Creek. The season opened at 5 in the morning. It was still almost dark when we started to fish, and I had a worm on a hook and threw the line in the water and felt a tug and threw a fish back over my head, and it landed in the grass behind me. And when I finally found it and the grass was wiggling, it was an 8-inch trout, and I thought it was the most wonderful thing in the history of the world. So, yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So
and my father had no experience whatsoever. He just wanted to be with his son, and he had a very clumsy piece of equipment. I can't remember what it was. But he hooked a foot-long fish, and he threw the rod down and grabbed the line and brought it in hand over hand. So, yeah, you're talking about being novices. Yes, we were.
That's amazing.
Real beginners, yeah. But, the great thing with me was, my childhood was fantastic due to the fact that we have within, at that time in State College, Pennsylvania, where my home was, we had a half a dozen streams within a 20-mile radius. There was Spring Creek, Fishing Creek, Penn's Creek, the Little Juniata, and a myriad of other streams, a lot of mountain streams. So it was a real mecca for trout fishing. And so, and then when I was a little older, and when I was riding my bicycle, it was I couldn't have had a more wonderful childhood, because I would pedal my bicycle to the tributaries of Spring Creek, some in the mountains, but like the Thompson Run and some great feeders that were little limestone streams that fed Spring Creek. And so, it was a real wonderful learning situation. When my bib overhauled, I would crawl up to the stream, and then early in the morning, and the grass was wet with dew, and I would be soaked. But I learned to crawl, because when I walked up to the stream, the fish went everywhere, and so it was a no-win situation. So I finally learned to stay low and crawl, and I learned so much from just plain observation.
Right. Right.
I learned.
And I was going to say. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
I learned the pecking order and how fish lots of times lined up. I learned, that how they positioned themselves to feed, and then I learned basically what they were feeding on. And I tell this one story, and I tell this story and Live the Stream, and I've told this story many times, but there was a trout that I was really trying to catch, and being so clumsy, and my casting was poor, and I would spook the fish every time that I went after it. And so I didn't know. Basically, I watched this fish, and it was feeding. It would be feeding off to one side, and then it would drop back, and it was behind a stone, and I could watch his mouth open and close, and I was totally frustrated. So I spooked the fish, and finally, out of frustration, walked into the stream and grabbed a handful of vegetation, and it was just alive with freshwater shrimp. And so I went up, and there was a little touch of orange when the shrimp are toward the end of their longevity. They'll have that little touch. And so I found some orange sewing thread in my mother's sewing box, and I got some fur, and it was, I think, fox fur, and I fashioned what I thought looked like a shrimp, and went back after that fish, and it was there, and I made a cast, and it was not a very accurate cast, but that fish moved a couple of feet, maybe 2 or 3 feet out of its way, and picked that nymph up, and it was a 14-inch brown, and I flipped it out on the bank without too much ceremony, and killed it, put it in my basket and my bicycle, and sung to the top of my lungs the whole way home because I was so thrilled with that fish. So
that's
yeah,
cool.
So that's my early childhood.
Gotcha. So
that's how it went.
So as you have the, and I want to get back, more of the history here on how you got up to teaching at the university. But can you take us back and tell us? You mentioned the Depression, and in my grandma, I remember her talking about the Depression. What did that period teach you? Do you remember much about it?
Well, I don't. I was born during the Depression, and I was born in 1929.
Oh, right.
90 years. Gotcha. I'm 90 years old now, but I remember, the fact that we had wall-to-wall nothing and back-to-the-wall payments. That times were really tough, and so my father, wanting to educate us when we moved to State College and the university was there. Then it was Pennsylvania State College. It wasn't a university then, and he finally got a job in the bursar's office as a clerk, and so. This is how but I remember the Depression. It was so and then when we come out of the Depression, we got into World War II,
right? And
so in the 40s, the gas was rationed, food was rationed, and so. My father and I both rode bicycles because of the gas situation.
Oh wow! So you were still fishing, going strong even throughout the.
Oh yeah. In the 40s, I was, and I caught my first trout on a fly when I was 9 years old, and there was a trico hatch on Spring Creek, and these fish were going crazy. And for whatever reason, the only flies I had were wet flies that my father got out of a Spiegel catalog, and Spiegel, that outfit's long gone. And all the flies that were wet flies, and they were all number 10s. But I fastened this fly onto my leader, and I've dropped it in, and it didn't sink right away. It just floated around, and this finally, for whatever reason, the trout committed suicide. But a 9-inch trout grabbed that fly, and I flipped it out in the bank, and so that was my first trout on a fly.
Oh, gotcha.
So, yeah.
Okay, so so basically you go into the 40s, and then can you take us back? So from that point on to where you start to get into the college and teaching, what went on between those two, that period between kind of the 40s and then when you started teaching at the college?
Well, and all through the 40s, I learned from a guy by the name of Clyde Scheffler that lived across the street from me. He was a pretty decent. He smoked too much, and he rolled his own cigarettes, and he had breathing problems. He was suffering from whatever, but he took me fishing a couple of times and taught me the wet fly game and how to rig wet flies and different patterns to use. And so I really became addicted to the wet fly game, and believe it or not, as you know, wet flies are effective all year round. And so depending how you fish them, you can fish them as a nymph, you can fish them as moving, and so many different ways of fishing them. But then through the 40s, I became a rather adept at the wet fly game, and then naturally, when they were on top, I adjusted to what they were doing on top. So, but back in my time, in the 40s, the end of the 30s and the 40s, the guys that had the expertise, Clyde Scheffler was a different breed, but guys like George Harvey and there was another guy by the name of Klein. These guys had some real insights into the game. They were advanced for their times, but nobody shared anything. They were not about to tell anybody anything. Basically, these are my secrets, and I'm not going to share because I don't want any competition type of thing, you know. So that's what we were faced with back in those days. So it was. But then I learned, you know, going to Fisherman's Paradise, I learned from other fishermen, watching them and talking to them, and I've got, you know, picked up a lot of insights into the game from just observation. So it was. I grew up, and I wouldn't change my childhood for anything in the world because it was so special.
Yeah.
You know, I had so many streams to fish, and
How did you get to? Can you take us to that point where you got and maybe explain the school, the you know, where you're teaching at the school? That was a big part of your career, right?
At Penn State?
Yeah, is that how you supported?
Let me take you back then. I graduated from the university in 1957, and I took a job at Penns Valley High School as a wrestling coach and a phys ed teacher, and I also taught history and a couple other subjects. But the reason I chose Penns Valley, and then jobs were, they needed teachers. They didn't pay anything. I think I was a head wrestling coach and taught different subjects. I think my salary was $4,000. So it wasn't a lot of money at the time, but you know, it was a job. But the reason I chose Penns Valley was because of Penns Creek, and I loved that. That was a big, wonderful trout stream, and so that gave me an opportunity to, you know, work big waters. And I found, you know, I made a study of the food chain and learned to imitate at the vise exactly what I thought was needed. And some of my patterns, like the sulfur nymph and my green drake nymph, and a couple other patterns, my crest bug. I took these insects home, stuck them on the end of a pin, and tied and screwed it around until I got basically what I thought was really the best imitation. And they were good imitations. They worked like gangbusters. And so then I started to get the insights on nymphing and how to really work the bottom and how to get line control from rod tip to the nymph. And then I learned with the depths and speed of the waters how to adjust my weights, and it became a real educational process. So then I the money was so good, I left Penns Valley and went to Katanning, Pennsylvania, into the western part of the state. Was there for 4 years, again, as a wrestling coach and a teacher. Fished some of the streams like the Allegheny River and some of the streams for bass and other warm water fish. But there were a couple of trout streams in western Pennsylvania that I fished. But I finally left it after 4 years and came back to Bold Eagle area, and that was on the Bold Eagle and Spring Creek. Spring Creek comes into the Bold Eagle. And so in 1968, I talked the administration into a fly fishing course, and it was probably one of the first ever in Pennsylvania, in a curriculum, a high school curriculum. and we had casting classes in the gym, and then I would take them over to the Bald Eagle across the road over to the stream and show them how to go after trout. So that went from 68, 69, and then I went to Penn State in 1970. So by these years, I was starting to become far more accomplished and I had more insights, I think, then. Well, and the book came out in 1981, and it's still going. And in 1993, I revised it and and they brought it out. It was a paperback at first, and then in 93 it came out as a hardback. But that book it's basically the insights of the nymphing, topwater game, the night game. It's pretty inclusive. Yeah, and it's sold many thousand copies. You can imagine from 1981 through to the present time. Here we are, and it's at this stage. My God, it's the fact that they're still printing it and selling it, and the book sales are going up now because of the stream.
What is it about that book that was so unique, so special?
Well, I think that it had a lot of really good basics, and leader construction and nymphing. Then later, I learned from George Harvey. George and I started to fish together. I would see him on the stream, but George wouldn't tell me anything. He wasn't. He wanted to catch fish and the hell with the kids. In other words, basically get lost, kid. And so, but then later on, and when I was at Bald Eagle teaching that course, and he knew that he was going to retire, and he was looking for somebody to continue the angling course at Penn State, then he started to take a real interest in me, and so then we started to fish together on a regular basis. And so then I learned some real insights, the tuck cast, and some things from George that were really helpful and gave me, so many more insights and many more approaches. And so that was a big help to me. And George and I both loved to fish at night, and so we really got into the night game, and we caught a lot of nice fish. So anyhow, then when it was his time to retire from Penn State University in 1970, he brought me into Penn State, and so I was an assistant wrestling coach for 2 years under Bill Cole, and then also took over the angling program.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So you took over that program from George in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what
from 1970 to 1989, or 19 years, I taught that course. Yeah.
Oh wow, 19 years. Okay, so that would bring us up to basically around 1990. And then who took over?
Yeah.
And then who took over from you then?
And a gentleman by the name of Vance McCullough took over.
Okay.
And Vance was a fine angler, I think he was there for 7 years, and then Mark Belden followed him, and now Greg Hoover has it.
Oh wow! So you were one of the longest, the tenured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brings us back to the 1990s, and we've talked. I definitely want to get into some of the night fishing because there's certain places out here. I'm on the West Coast, and we don't have a heck of a lot of night fishing. In fact, I don't even think it's legal in most areas.
Yeah, I remember fishing in California, and the guy that wanted me to fish with him, and I think this was on the Truckee,
uh-huh.
and he said, "I think we can do better after dark." And even though he said it's illegal, but he says nobody around here is ever going to catch us. So
that's right.
So I did night fish in California, and I did catch a couple of fish. So yeah.
Yeah, you can do it
illegally. Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, we've all had some of those moments for sure. What do you think? For the night game, can you explain, maybe just describe what that's like for people that have never done it, or how it might be
night fishing?
Yeah, how is that different from normal?
Yeah,
normal
one
fishing?
of the things, and you want to learn the water that you're going to fish. You really want to know it well in the daytime. Let's say that there's a pool or a run that you holds good fish. And so you don't know, on the far bank you may have a lot of vegetation and a lot of trees or whatever. You want to learn to cast and make sure that you can get your flies back under those trees, and you know where to drift that rod and where to squeeze off that power stroke and how to work the water. Because at night, and without that daylight, and is not that good, you better know your water. And so you learn it in the daytime, and then you transfer it over at night. And then secondly, it all depends on what you're fishing, but if when I'm using like the George Harvey big wet flies at night, or I have a couple of patterns. I have a stone fly pattern that's it's on a number 4. It's very effective, and then sometimes I nymph at night. But no matter what you're doing, it's you slow the whole process down. Big fish. They have excellent eyesight at night, better than you think, but it's your whole process is slowing down and working slowly to give them a better chance to see it, and still you're moving your flies slowly, and movement does kill. They'll pick up something that's moving. And so that's the other aspect. And then here again, it depends on a lot of different things. The depth and speed of the water. What maybe there is a stonefly hatch, or maybe at night there's a sulfur hatch, and that sulfur hatch has been coming off for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and so. You can do well in the daytime, but when you're after the bigger fish and the heavyweights, and then I nymph after dark. Now here's something that it's hard to believe, but big fish or any fish, any trout, they can pick up like a number 12 or even as small as a 14. They have that visibility after dark to see those flies, and so I've nymphed upstream, working pockets and working glides and runs with nymphs at night, and you can get closer to your quarry at night, and so I short line after night with nymphs, like a sulfur hatch with sulfur nymphs, and it can be very effective. Very effective. Yeah. And here's another tip, let's say the green drake hatch is on Penn's Creek, and everybody is standing around and getting ready for the green drakes, and they'll fish after dark on fish feeding on top. But what they don't understand, and you may have a lot of green drakes coming down, and trout are intercepting them with not a lot of great regularity, and maybe or even maybe one or two fish maybe feeding steadily, and everybody's keying on what they see on top. But what they don't understand is that sulfur hatch has been on for weeks, and those fish are so conditioned to that sulfur, they don't really give a toot, because that green drake hasn't been on long enough to really stimulate them. So I go and I'm fishing with a pair of sulfur nymphs after dark, and I'm catching fish, and other guys aren't, and they're saying, what's he doing, and why is he catching, and why aren't we catching? And that's the reason, to try to have been conditioned to the sulfurs, and that's what they're looking for. And if you get it down to them and the right depth and the speed, then you're going to catch fish. So it's just, and then as the green drake hatch, let's say, progresses, and they start to condition to that fly, then I'll, after dark, go down after with a pair of green drake nymphs. So, and then I will, at night, when those nymphs are on, instead of nymphing lots of times, when they're starting to lift, I will turn around with a pair of big wet flies and go after them, working wet flies, because they're now starting to look up and they're intercepting stuff coming up. So wet flies can be deadly.
So, yeah, that all makes sense. So basically, the advantage is, one of them is that you can be a little stealthier. It's easier to get closer to the fish.
Yeah, closer to the fish, sure.
Yeah, but just fishing in the dark, it sounds like a lot of fun. Just trying not to fall on the ground.
Yeah. And then with wet flies, and you're working downstream, you can cover a little bit more water, and on the swing, and sometimes you hold your wet flies in one productive area. You can reach with the rod and hold them there for a little longer, and bounce them, and where you might have some feeding fish, and they take them. So
that's cool.
And then there's a dry fly game, at night, and it's, you got fish rising in front of you, and one thing I learned, and this was a great learning session. I was on Penn's Creek one night, and there was a green drake hatch, and I was working what I thought was a pretty good pattern, and I had, I think, 4 or 5 fish feeding steadily in front of me, and I couldn't raise one of them. There's no way I could catch them, so I got down on my belly, and I just crawled right up to the very edge of the stream. And although it was pretty dark, I could see well enough, and as my eyes adjusted, these fish were really almost in front of me, and what I found out was that the fish, the flies that were spent, they didn't bother them, but any fly that was moving and causing a bit of a commotion, they inhaled. So then I learned that if I could hold my fly in their feeding zone and move it, I would take more fish. And so that night, after watching those trout inhaled flies that moved, then I started to move my fly, and just a short line, and just keeping the flies kind of moving and drifting in their feeding zone, and I picked up more fish. I finally started to catch them. So
that's awesome. No, this is good. I want to follow up too. I have some questions from some people in the Facebook group for you, but before I get there, we talked a little bit about wrestling, and obviously that's been a big part of your life as a coach. What can you talk about, like, what makes a good wrestler, and is there any similarities between wrestling and fly fishing?
Well, patience is one thing. And first you have to have a knowledge of the game. You have to know what you're doing to be a good wrestler. You have to have some smarts. I had a lot of coaching in wrestling, and because I wrestled for State College High School, and then I joined the Navy, and I wrestled for Pensacola Pre-Flight, and then I wrestled at Penn State, and so some of the coaching was excellent, but not so much for me. My high school coach was a wonderful man, taught us how to live a good moral life and all the wonderful things, but he was not a very good wrestling coach. I mean, he was and I didn't learn very much from him. I learned from other wrestlers. And then finally, when I wrestled for Pensacola Pre-Flight, there was a gentleman who had been an Olympic coach with a team back in 1936, and he was a hell of a nice guy. But here again, we didn't learn much. We had on that team, we had a lot of guys that had wrestled for other universities, and they're now going to Pensacola Pre-Flight to become pilots. I was I think the only white hat on that team, the only non-officer on that team. So anyhow, and we had kind of a collegiate schedule. We wrestled Northwestern and Millersville State Teachers College and Appalachian, and we had a neat schedule. So then when I came to Penn State, and before that. Right out of high school, I went to the Olympic trials in 1948, and I took second in the Middle Atlantic AAUs, and that was kind of a bit of a qualifier for the Olympic trials. But I got beat in the Olympic trials. But anyhow, that was a good educational experience for me because it was the Olympic style was different from the freestyle that in high school and college. So anyhow, then I went on to Penn State, and we had some wonderful wrestlers that I learned from. But our wrestling coach was here again a wonderful man. But basically, wrestling practice at Penn State was 3 9-minute matches, and you go home. So it wasn't really good stuff. And then when I was an assistant coach at Penn State, I was assistant under Bill Cole. And Bill Cole wrestled for Iowa State Teachers College, which is northern Iowa now. And he was a 3-time national champion. Could have been a 4-time, but he was on Normandy Beach, so he missed that year, and he survived it. Yeah, and so his coach at Iowa State Teachers College was a wonderful coach, and he became an amazing wrestler. His record was 75-0, and so he was a 3-time national champion, and I learned more in 1 week from him, and I had all the other many years, So yeah, I was wrestling varsity for Penn State when I was 28, so I was a lot older than a lot of the kids,
Gotcha.
They're coming out of high school and they're 18, 19, 20, yeah. So I was an old man.
So basically the wrestling piece, that's always been, obviously a big part of your life. What?
Yeah, it's been a big part of my life, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I coached at those 3 different high schools, and that was a wonderful experience, and I think I hopefully helped a lot of kids, so yeah, it was wonderful.
Cool. So, I mentioned I had George Daniel on, and he made the comment. We were kind of jokingly, but he said he mentioned about a little bit of your personality. He says occasionally you would slap him around a little bit to get him fired up. Is that is there any truth
really.
to that?
I not physically, but I would mentally get on his case. And he was. There's some situations when I would be fishing with him that he wasn't quite getting it, and I would kind of get on his case a little bit and push him a little bit, and so yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what when you have somebody that's maybe not quite getting it, how do you know? Kind of getting on them. I mean, I guess that's one teaching. Is that the same thing with wrestling? Where does that make a good wrestling coach?
And with wrestling and with fly fishing too. With wrestling, I would drill, and we would drill until it was done properly, and they they had it, they learned it, and when you drill it and you pick it apart and you put all the pieces together and on a move, and whether if it's a stand, how to turn which foot's coming out first, and that's the foot you turn in, and when you stand, all your weight's coming back in, and your thrust is back, and your arms are in tight. So if the guy comes over you, he goes over your arms, and that way when you pivot, you can slide your shoulder, and his arms can't stop you, and those are basics. And so it's the same thing in fishing. Basics. Your cast, you don't with some cast, you stop the rod high. You have a little a tuck in it. You stop the rod high, let the nymph stop high and duck under, and you don't make that cast until you feel the pull of the weights behind you, because if you start too early, you don't have a good cast and you don't have control. So you have to feel the weights behind you, and you can feel that subtle pull of the rod tip as it loads. Then the casting stroke is a short stroke, and you stop it high. Therefore, you get a nice deep tuck, and the nymphs come to on the extended cast, and then the nymphs stop and then tuck down. And when you make that cast, you push your thumb down on the rod, and your thumb's on top of the rod. You push your thumb down, so the thumb pressure that stops any tailing loops, so you don't have your weights and everything pulling together into a terrible mess. So it takes the weights over the rod tip. So those are basics. Your thumb comes in. It's where you stop the rod. It's waiting till it loads, and it's all of these things. These are basics, and then you drill. So that's what I would do with George. I would take my hand and put my hand on his, and we would drill until he got the feel of it. And then he could understand it, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
And he became a very good fisherman. He became an excellent fisherman. He's a dear boy.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think he has. We talked a little bit about the school too. I asked him, if that might be something he'd be interested in. It sounds like, if the opportunity came, he might.
Well, that's what I want him. That he's the next man in, as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah,
there's right now. There's an endowment for the angling program, and it's under my name, and so. I think we have a couple $100,000 in this endowment so far, and that means that they can't dump the angling program, and so Greg Hoover, who has it now, he wants to go a couple more years, but I've already talked to the personnel at the university, and they know and they said that they would respect my wishes, and so. I want George in there because I think he could do an excellent job.
There you go. Good stuff. That's good to hear. Yeah, George is
mm-hmm.
I just met him on the podcast, but yeah, he seems like a great guy. So that's cool to hear. I want to get into a few tips because we had some questions from people in the group, and one of them was casting. Obviously, you've taught a lot of people how to cast and the basics there.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Hardy was asking about if you have any tips for casting into the wind.
Into the wind, yeah. I drift the rod into the wind, and I drift the rod further forward, and then my casting stroke is nothing but the wrist, and pressure down to make sure that line is going over the rod tip, and with the back two fingers pull, the thumb pushes down, and you don't dump the rod tip. You keep it rather level and right into the wind, and that's how you do that.
Oh, okay. So you use you use more wrist to kind of.
Yeah, I use wrist. Yeah. All my casting is wrist.
It is.
So many people lock. Oh yeah. So many people lock the wrist, and that's okay for tournament casting or whatever. But the 10-2 cast. But all my casting strokes are very short.
Okay. So
the thumb comes up into the cast, and then my hand drifts forward only an inch or a couple of inches, and then it's wrist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you're making how long of a cast could you make using a lot of wrist?
Well, using my wrist and with double hauling, and I have a very short haul, and I can shoot probably 80 feet, 90 feet.
No kidding. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was talking to before we went on, Lucas, who was helped produce the Live the Stream, the movie. We were chatting about it, and he noted you were out on one of the streams in the movie, and you were, I think, casting 80 or 85 feet. Same thing, just with ease. So I mean, obviously you can cast far. That is a good tip, because I know I've taught people, done some casting instruction in the past, and I always talk about not breaking the wrist. But it's good to hear that there's definitely times where you might want to break it a little bit to get a specific type of cast.
Another thing, with distance casting, I call it, I climb the angle. I'm lifting the line. I'm lifting up at the line is at an angle, and you keep the rod tip going at that angle, so you have a nice high back cast, and then you have a lot of line in there. Then you have your haul, and then you have a lot of line in the air behind you. And one of the big secrets, and I think one of the real clues for distance casting is you have to wait till you feel the rod load. So many people are in a hurry, and they have a lot of line behind them, and they're too impatient, and they make the casting stroke before that rod is ever really loaded. So if you climb that angle and you have that nice high back cast, and and as you climb the angle and you stop that rod tip up in there, right, absolutely, you're stopping the rod high and stopping it quickly up high. Then you have a nice tight back cast. Then when you can feel that rod load, you can just feel it pull. That you can feel it right down to your casting hand, and then I just put the wrist to it, and then off it goes.
There you go. And how do you, for somebody who's new to casting, knowing when it's loaded, is there a good way to know? Does it just all feel?
Yeah, it's all feel. You have to feel it. It comes right down to your hand. Yeah.
Okay. And I had another question here. This one comes from Sam, and he asked, he wanted to know what your favorite rod is today in relation to kind of the nymphing stuff you've done.
Orvis makes the Helios. That's I like that. I like the 9 foot for the 5 or 6 weight. And then but Cortland Line Company is now making a real nice rod, and I have the 9 for 5 weight, and it's for nymphing. It's pretty deadly, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And they also make a 10-foot rod that I like, and that's a Cortland makes a 10 for a 4 weight. That's a great nymphing rod, yeah.
Okay, so you're perfect. So for your style of nymphing, you like is a 10-foot rod is your favorite length?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and 10 foot for a 5 weight or 6 weight.
Yeah, and I use, like even when I'm brush fishing, I use as long a rod as I can possibly get away with. In a thicket, if I can get away with a 7.5 foot rod, I will, because then I can lift more line over more currents for a longer drift.
Okay, all right, great. And I also had Jeff Ellie mention this. He was curious. He wanted to hear, and you mentioned earlier, I think you got this fish night fishing, but do you still hold the record for the largest trout? Is it a brown trout in the state?
No, I might. It might still be the record on a fly.
Oh, okay.
Mine was a 16-pound, 34-inch fish, but it's been broken several times since that. 17 pounds.
Okay.
The record now in Pennsylvania is 19 pounds, but that was taken on a live minnow in Lake Erie.
Can you take us to that moment and talk about how you got that fish and what that was like?
Yeah, that was I had fish for that fish for. I heard him one night, and it sounded like somebody. Somebody. To me, it sounded like a deer jumped into the water off the bank, and it was a terrific splash. And then, but with the deer, you hear him running out, and then it just was stone quiet. And I knew it was a big fish. And there weren't any carp or anything, and that big. Only thing that big would be a trout. And so I started after that. I worked the rest of that year, and that was, let me say, I caught the fish in '77, so that was '76, '75, and then the next year, I worked only in the dark of the moon, and so I worked the same area where from the bottom was a big long hole, and I worked from basically where I heard that fish was down to the tail end of the pool. But there was a tree that had fallen over in the water, and I think that's where that fish was living. And so I worked from that tree down, and to no avail for the second year. And then George Harvey and I were talking, and he said, Joe, he said, that fish might be going up into that. There was a nice riff coming in, and he said that fish could be going up in there and feeding in the riffs. And for these reasons, crayfish are nocturnal. Sculpins, which I call them the strawberry shortcake of the trout world, they're nocturnal. All your hatching activity, your stone flies and your bigger flies coming off are nocturnal. So he said, why don't you, and the riffs, this is where all that activity really happens. And so, you have a much better chance of finding a good fish where the riff goes into the pool. So he said, why don't you try that? So this is a crazy story. The night before, Lefty Cray he was writing for the Baltimore Sun at the time, and he wanted a little night fishing or a night fishing story. And so he got a hold of me and said, do you think you could get a good fish for me? And I said, maybe I could if I could get lucky. And so that night we were down on Spruce Creek, and I took about a 6-pound brown trout, and it was a heavyweight. It was about I think maybe 26 inches long, and then he had a real good story, and he was excited, and I was really tickled too. And so the very next night it had a real light little rain, and a buddy of mine called, who I taught with at Baltimore High School, and he said, Hump, he says, I'm so tired of watching television. He said, why don't you go fishing tonight? And I said, well, that's not a bad idea. We could have fun together. So I went down to this pool. This is on Fishing Creek in Pennsylvania. So I went down to this pool, and I went down through this long run, and I took a trout, maybe 18, 19, and that was exciting. And so by now it's midnight, and Al says, my friend says, don't you think it's time to go home now? He says, and I said, well, we will, and let me just go to the top of this, up by this riff, and go down through this one more time. And so I had a pair of big George Harvey night flies on, and I threw them across under a hemlock bough on the far side, and there was a little backwater, and they started to swing, and they stopped, and I put the hooks to this fish, and it sounded like somebody was rolled over a wash tub. And my buddy said, Al said, oh my God, what was that? And I said, that's a trout, and I have them on the other end. And so that trout went like crazy trying to reach that tree down in the water. And I finally got enough pressure on him, and thank God that I was using a heavy enough leader that it didn't break. And I turned the fish, and finally got him up under my feet, and I didn't have a net, and a net wouldn't have had a net big enough anyhow. So I got them on the rocks in front of me and threw the rod down and got both arms under it and threw them up on the bank. And my buddy said, "Oh my God," he says, "I've never seen a fish this big." And I said, "Well, neither have I." So there was a warden, a game warden, was a friend of mine, and he lived in Bellefonte. I was on my way home, so I stopped into his house, and by now it's 4 a.m, and I knocked on the door, and he thought I was in some kind of trouble, and I said, "No, I got a trout you got to see." And he says, "You woke me up at 4 a.m. to show me some damn fish?" And I said, "Yeah." So then the records were with length, not weight, because there had been so much cheating going on, and so they went to length, and so my trout was 1 inch longer than the previous record. So yeah, and it turned out to be a heavier fish too. So yeah.
Oh wow,
yeah,
wow, that's a great story. So do you guys still have? Do you still have some big? And what creek was that caught in?
That was Fishing Creek. But no, I don't think after all those years, that's 77. That was a while back, and so a lot of people, when they get a good fish, they kill fish, and so it's hard to find the heavyweights anymore,
Yeah, it is.
And on some of our streams, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and you've mentioned wet flies a few times. On wet flies, do you ever weight wet flies when you're tying them?
I do. I have. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And what situation might you fish? I guess just like nymphs, where do you put a little?
Yeah, you fish them like nymphs, or when you're getting into, and if you're working down and across, and you get into the heavier water, an unweighted wet fly. You're just under the surface, but with a little weight on a pair of flies, and maybe even a little additional weight on a leader, you can drop them down pretty well, and pick up fish that if they're moving up, but and they're chasing stuff moving, you're in their ballpark, and so they're lifting, but they don't have to lift that far. So yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we were kind of talking about taking us back to 1990, I think is right around there is when you finished your teaching career. Between 1990 and today, what's been keeping you busy as far as?
Oh, well, I worked with Chuck Furimsky for many years, and doing the major fly fishing shows, and they went from Seattle to Pleasanton, California I've been doing those for years. And then like on the West Coast, like California, different fly fishing organizations like Trout Unlimited or Fly Fishing Federation clubs, they would hire me and I would do 5 in a row. And then I would go from venue to venue to venue, And so I did that for a few years. Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Yeah. Are you getting ready to retire here? Are you gonna? No,
my daughters are coming in to pick me up, and tomorrow night I will be in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. So Saturday there's a fly fishing show. I'm being honored. I'm getting an award for teaching youth in the fly fishing game, and so and I'm doing a show in the afternoon. So yeah, and then the following week I'll be with Chuck again in the fly fishing show in Lancaster. That's a big one, and so yeah. So I just keep moving, and then I'm doing the Philadelphia Anglers. Another fly fishing group. So yeah, I've got a lot of things going. So and that's at 90 years old. That's good because it keeps me moving. So many people when they get into their 70s or even 60s, 70s, 80s, and they said, well, I'm too old for this, and I'm going to just sit down and watch the tube and take life easy, and they fall apart. You know?
That's true. I agree. I think you got to keep going. You got to keep your body as well as your mind, right? You got to keep both of those things going.
Yeah. And once you're moving, and I still, I've had a couple of serious back operations and one hip replaced, and that's from wear and tear over the years, and I might say I lost a lot of matches too. So anyhow, won a few and lost a few. But anyhow, wear and tear in the body.
Yeah.
And with arthritis and old age. But anyhow, but I keep moving, and I still pump still. I still do a little lifting. And
that's right. I heard that you actually even do some wrestling, right? Have you?
Yeah, I do now. Since my last back operation, I won't go on the mat anymore. But I did. Yeah, I was rolling around with some of the Penn State guys. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty good.
It was fun.
Yeah. Wrestling. I was more into basketball and baseball. Those were kind of my sports.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, but
that's what you kept moving, and that was good.
Yeah. I think, and I remember my grandma. She lived a long life as well, and she pretty much took college classes throughout her whole life, all the way up until I think into her 90s, and even I think close to 100. And I think that was the mental part that kept her going strong. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Did she make 100?
Yeah, she did.
Oh,
she did.
Wow.
That was her. Again, goals. Goals is another thing to think about too. That's important because she had the goal. She's like, I want to hit 100. That was as we got. I think when she hit 95, she was like, all right, I'm gonna go for 100. So.
That is so cool. Yeah. I love that attitude.
Exactly.
That's wonderful. Yeah,
she's a good. I did have a question, and I think we're getting pretty close to getting out of here. But you've taught a lot of kids. Do you have a quick tip or something for somebody who wants to get better at teaching kids or youth in general?
At teaching kids?
Yeah.
Basics. Go right back to basics. Like in casting, the little things. Lift you load the rod as you're lifting it. The stroke is your rod stops straight up and down. You wait till the line unfolds behind you. Okay, that's the count of 1,000. If it's just a normal cast, you just say to yourself 1,000. Thumb pushing down, just some basics, and
Okay, so keep it simple. Do you have
keep it simple? Yeah.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about this, some of your top flies, but do you have, if you had to pick a couple of your go-to flies, if you just had to pick two that you'd stick with?
This is on top?
This, it could
or
be
when?
just in general. Maybe pick one top, one nymph.
Okay, if I were going in just one top fly, it could be an Adams, because it's...
Okay.
And then you could put a yellow body on it, and then it would cover a lot of different flies.
Sure.
My sulfur nymph is deadly just about all year long.
Okay.
And then the cress bug, CRESS, cress bug, named after watercress, in our limestone streams here in like Spring Creek and some of the other major spring creeks, they're deadly. And the freshwater shrimp are always tough. There's freshwater shrimp across the nation.
Yeah,
so,
there are. Okay, and then what if about if you had to say two of your top tips, just in general? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of tips here, but do you have a couple of just general fly fishing tips you'd throw out there?
Well, just one of the major tips is line control. You have to have good control from rod tip to flies all the time. Whether you're nymphing, whether it's dry fly, no matter what it is, you have to have line control. So if you don't have that, you don't have anything. What?
How do you control line when you're casting, say, 85 or 100 feet? How do you control your line then?
What you do, you can use once you make your initial stroke. Then you can move the rod. And so as you might be a reach cast, you shock it, you reach, and if your leader, one of the secrets of this whole game is your leader. If you build your leader properly and you have that tippet coming down and stacking for you, now you have a drift. If you straighten the leader out and you're working on top of the dry fly, you're killing yourself. So the moral of the story is your leader is so important.
Yeah. How do you
your design?
What is your how do you build?
You just remember this: as you graduate down in diameters, your last maybe 30 inches or even 3 feet of tippet, you need that length for a good drift. And then if you shock it, and what you do, you stop it high, that's the shock, and then you drop your rod tip before the fly comes down, and then that stacks the leader.
Gotcha. And do you typically you build most of your own leaders?
Yeah, I do. I build my leaders for the conditions I'm facing.
Gotcha. What would be a typical for your style of nymphing, if you had to say just in general, what would that leader look like?
Maybe 9, anywhere from 9 to 10 feet.
Okay, cool.
George's book on dynamic nymphing. I think that might be a good nymphing book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And always liked George Harvey's little booklet, but I don't know whether you even get that anymore.
Okay, yeah, I'll look it up. Yeah, if I can. I'll try to find some of George's stuff.
It was good.
Okay.
And some real basics and.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of. It's crazy nowadays because it's probably different from back when you were teaching. There's just so many resources, and I had.
Oh my! Yeah, there's thousands of books out there.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. I was, you've been through it. I mean, you've been around longer than most. But we've talked to some stories about the differences of how fly fishing has evolved over the years. What do you think when you look back to the 1950s up until the 50s or now? I mean, what do you think is the biggest difference you see? Have you seen a lot of changes?
Well, the rods that we have today are amazing stuff. They're made out of the graphite, and us.
Yep.
And all that, and even. I'm trying to think. At 90, words don't come to me sometimes. But
you mentioned
titanium, even they're coming up with different stuff in the rods, the designs, and the materials now are just so fantastic. Like I say, I started with that Kingfisher bamboo, and it was a club, and then up through my lifetime, finally we had bamboo, and the rods became, better and better designs, but then they had the steel rod. They were hollow, but they were still clumsy, and it was, they were cumbersome and difficult to cast with lots of times. But now the rods are just, the materials are just amazing. Yeah,
it is. Do you have, when you look back at the stuff you've done, we mentioned a book. Do you have a work, something you're most proud of in your career in fly fishing?
Oh, I think that teaching all the people I have over my lifetime. I guess maybe if you think about it, all those years at Penn State and traveling the country and all of the shows and teaching many thousands of people, I think that's if I've helped somebody and have given them maybe a new lease on life or gave them something exciting to look forward to when they go on a trout stream, I've given them some direction that has helped them in their life. What greater rewards could you have?
Yeah, no, I agree. That is awesome. If you look back on your life, say your 25-year-old self, would you have any? If you look back at that age, I think that was 1955, 56 in there. Do you have any words of advice you might give that person, yourself, your 25-year-old self?
Well, yeah. Let me see.
You could think about that one a little bit if you want.
Yeah,
that's not
I would think.
Not an easy one.
I would say one of the things that I advise people on a trout stream, when you're fishing, look up. Don't stare at the water for 8 straight hours. Take a look up and look at the beauty around you and see what the good Lord has given us and enjoy it. You know, so many people get so fixed on catching that fish that they don't see the beauty in the world around them. So that's a tip.
That's great. Okay. I think we've kind of covered a good chunk of what I wanted to get to. You know, maybe I'll keep up with you, and I think the movie's going to be launched here. Once it's out, I might get him on, and maybe when that happens, I can get you back on. We can fill the gaps of anything we missed or whatever. But
no, well, I just, you know, I'm still going to shows and, you know, doing what I can.
Yeah. I had you mentioned.
I'm going to give you. Do we have any time left at all?
Oh yeah, as much as you need.
Okay, here's a 10-second story.
All right.
Lady asked me. She said, "Could you teach a busload of 5th graders?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll try. You know, these are 10-year-old kids." I said, "I'll give it a try." And so they came down from Nanoglow, Pennsylvania, down to Fisherman's Paradise, and so they got off the bus. There must have been maybe 15 of them, and we all got them corralled. And I'm a bit of a disciplinarian, and so I had them marching to the tune, and I got them all lined up. And in a very short time, they were casting, and I was just so pleased that they were so attentive as little children, and they were doing so well, and I was very pleased. So, and the people that were helping, that came along with them, that assisted me, they were just in awe how well these kids were doing. So I take them over to the stream to show them how to work the stream. And so, and how to fish, basically, and they were going to fish dry flies. And so, I put a fly on, and I had a trout come up and look at it, and then I missed one, but I didn't catch a fish for the kids. So later on, I went home, and later on that day, this woman called me, and it was in charge of the children, and she said, "Oh, Mr. Humphrey," she said, "it was just wonderful." She said, those kids were just doing everything, that our casting was just wonderful. And she said, and one little girl got 3 trout, and another little boy got 2 trout, and another little girl got 3 trout, and another little boy got 4 trout. And I'm saying, holy hell, I just got outfished by a busload of 5th graders.
Nice.
So what I'm saying is, this game, the way the good Lord made it, nobody will ever have all the answers. And so it's always humbling, and it's always, and it's to be consistent, taking fish. You can do everything you know to do. Yeah. But you have to have some luck.
Yeah. Well, what if you hadn't gone into fly fishing? What do you think you would have done for a career? Well, I guess other than you had wrestling too, but if you didn't have wrestling, and fly fishing,
I would have probably gone into the wrestling game and stayed in coaching.
Coaching, for sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, Joe. Well, that's about all I have for you.
Davey.
Yeah,
buddy.
I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, I'll if as I get questions of people in the audience, if they want to check back with me, I'll definitely. I know you're not easy to get a hold of online, but I'll at least connect them with the film and get a link out to that, because I think that's I'm gonna hopefully help get the word out to get that out to people. And I really look forward to seeing it.
I appreciate that too, David.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, thanks for everything.
Great being with you. Okay.
All right. See you, Joe.
Talk to you later. Okay.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/73. And another quick shout out to the Wet Fly Swing Members Society, where you can support the podcast, get all the great content from our partner companies, and a bunch of great discounts and bonuses. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon, and hope to maybe connect with you on the river or online.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.